The desert heat of Camp Lejeune shimmered off the concrete as Captain Janet Richardson stepped through the gates of the 3rd Marine Expeditionary Force compound. At 29 years old, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had earned every stripe on her uniform through merit alone. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, and her green eyes held the kind of steady focus that came from years of making split-second decisions under pressure. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But it wasn't her distinguished service record that would define her first impression on the 500 Marines of the 2nd Battalion. It was her voice, soft, measured, and completely at odds with what these battle-hardened warriors expected from their new commanding officer. The morning briefing room at Building 447 buzzed with the restless energy of Marines who had just returned from a grueling deployment in Syria. These weren't fresh-faced recruits learning to tie their boots. They were seasoned combat veterans who had survived firefights in Raqqa, coordinated airstrikes in the Euphrates Valley, and lost brothers in the kind of operations that never made it into official reports. Staff Sergeant Marcus Cole, a towering figure who stood 6'5" and carried the scars of 3 IED explosions, sat in the back row with his arms crossed. His squad had been through 4 different commanding officers in the past 2 years, each one promising to understand what they had been through, each one failing to deliver on that promise. Sergeant First Class David Brooks adjusted his prosthetic leg, a souvenir from a roadside bomb outside Damascus, and exchanged glances with Corporal Lisa Zhang, whose marksmanship skills had saved more lives than anyone could count. They had heard the rumors about their new captain. Princeton graduate, top of her class at Officer Candidate School, decorated for valor in classified operations that none of them were cleared to know about. What they hadn't heard was anything about her ability to lead Marines who had seen the kind of combat that aged men by decades in the span of months. The room fell silent as Janet entered, her footsteps barely audible on the polished floor. She moved to the front of the room with the kind of economy of movement that suggested she never wasted energy on unnecessary gestures. Her uniform was impeccable, her bearing professional, but when she opened her mouth to address the assembled Marines, something unexpected happened. Her voice emerged as barely more than a conversational tone, the kind of volume that might be appropriate for a boardroom discussion but seemed completely inadequate for commanding the attention of 500 Marines who had learned to communicate over the thunder of artillery and the roar of helicopter rotors. "Good morning, Marines," she said, her words clear but quiet. "I'm Captain Richardson, and I'll be taking command of the 2nd Battalion effective immediately." The silence that followed wasn't the respectful quiet of attentive soldiers. It was the uncomfortable pause that precedes judgment. Marines in the middle rows leaned forward, straining to hear. Those in the back exchanged skeptical looks that communicated more than words ever could. Staff Sergeant Cole's expression hardened. He had served under commanders who could make their voices heard across a battlefield, who could bellow orders that cut through chaos and confusion. This soft-spoken woman seemed to violate every principle of military leadership he had learned in his 12 years of service. Janet continued her introduction, seemingly unaware of the growing skepticism in the room. Her voice remained steady and professional, but never rose above that conversational level that had immediately marked her as different from every other commanding officer these Marines had served under. She outlined her background: graduate of Princeton School of Public and International Affairs, distinguished service in the Marine Corps for 8 years, decorations for valor in classified operations that none of them were cleared to know about. What Janet didn't mention, what she couldn't mention due to classification levels that exceeded most of these Marines' clearances, was the real reason she had been assigned to command the 2nd Battalion. 3 weeks earlier, Marine Corps leadership had received intelligence indicating a high-probability terrorist operation targeting American forces in the region. The operation would require the kind of precise, coordinated response that separated exceptional military units from merely competent ones. Janet Richardson had been specifically chosen for this command, not despite her unconventional leadership style, but because of it. Her previous assignments had involved operations so sensitive that their existence was known only to a handful of senior officers and intelligence officials. She had coordinated multi-unit operations in urban environments where traditional command structures had proven inadequate, where success depended on the ability to adapt rapidly to changing circumstances. But none of the Marines sitting in that briefing room knew any of this. All they knew was that their new commanding officer spoke like a librarian and looked like she had never seen combat outside of training exercises. The skepticism in the room was palpable. These Marines had followed leaders through house-to-house fighting in Fallujah, had trusted commanders who shared their foxholes and ate the same MREs and breathed the same dust. They had learned to respect leaders who earned their authority through shared hardship and demonstrated competence under fire. Janet Richardson, with her quiet voice and academic credentials, seemed to represent everything they distrusted about modern military leadership. She appeared to be another staff officer who had been promoted beyond her competence, another example of the bureaucratic thinking that put theories ahead of practical experience. As she concluded her introduction, Janet asked if there were any questions. The silence stretched uncomfortably long. Finally, Staff Sergeant Cole raised his hand, his voice carrying the kind of edge that suggested this wasn't going to be a routine inquiry. "Ma'am, with respect, how do you expect to command Marines in combat when half of us can't hear you from across the room?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Other Marines shifted in their seats, some nodding slightly in agreement. This was the moment that would establish the dynamic between Janet and her new command, the first test of whether she could earn the respect of warriors who had learned to follow leaders through life-and-death situations. Janet's response was characteristic of everything these Marines would come to learn about her leadership style. She didn't raise her voice to match Cole's aggression. She didn't bristle at the implied criticism. Instead, she simply looked directly at him and spoke in the same quiet, measured tone she had used throughout her introduction. "Staff Sergeant Cole, I understand your concern. In my experience, Marines who are paying attention don't need to be shouted at to hear what they need to hear." The answer was diplomatic but unsatisfying. It didn't address the fundamental question about her ability to lead under pressure. It didn't demonstrate the kind of commanding presence that these Marines had learned to associate with effective leadership. As the briefing concluded and the Marines filed out of the room, the conversations that followed would establish the pattern of skepticism and resistance that would define Janet's first weeks in command. They spoke in hushed tones about their new captain, comparing her unfavorably to previous commanders who had earned their respect through demonstrated competence and shared sacrifice. The consensus was clear. Captain Janet Richardson might have impressive credentials, but she didn't have what it took to lead Marines in combat. Her quiet voice was seen as evidence of weakness, her academic background as proof that she didn't understand the realities of military leadership. What none of them realized was that they were about to discover just how wrong their assumptions were. The woman they had dismissed as unsuitable for command was actually one of the most accomplished tactical officers in the Marine Corps, with a service record that would have impressed even the most skeptical among them if they had been cleared to know about it. But Janet Richardson had learned long ago that respect had to be earned, not assigned. She knew that these Marines would never follow her because of her rank or her credentials. They would only follow her when she proved that she deserved their trust. And she was about to get that opportunity sooner than anyone expected. The mess hall at 600 hours was typically a cacophony of clattering trays, scraping chairs, and the boisterous conversation of Marines fueling up for another day of training. But when Captain Janet Richardson entered the dining facility 3 days after her initial briefing, the atmosphere shifted perceptibly. Conversations didn't stop entirely, but they lowered to the kind of whispered exchanges that made it clear she was the subject of discussion. Janet moved through the serving line with the same quiet efficiency she brought to everything else, selecting her breakfast without fanfare or attempting at casual conversation with the Marines around her. She had learned years ago that trying to force camaraderie rarely produced genuine respect. Instead, she chose a table near the windows, opened her tactical manual, and began reviewing logistics protocols while she ate. At a table across the room, Staff Sergeant Marcus Cole was holding court with a group of squad leaders who hung on his every word. Cole had earned his reputation the hard way, surviving 3 deployments in some of the most dangerous operational theaters in the Middle East. When he spoke about leadership, Marines listened. "I'm telling you, this is going to be a problem," Cole said, keeping his voice low but letting his frustration show. "You can't command respect by whispering. These aren't corporate executives we're dealing with here. These are Marines who need to trust that their commanding officer can make life-and-death decisions under pressure." Sergeant First Class David Brooks nodded grimly. The explosion that had cost him his leg had also taught him the importance of clear, decisive communication in combat situations. When the bullets start flying, you need someone who can cut through the chaos, someone who can grab you by the collar and drag you to safety if necessary. I just don't see it with her. Corporal Lisa Zhang, normally one of the more diplomatic voices in the group, found herself agreeing with the assessment. "Look, I'm not saying she's not qualified on paper. Princeton education, decorated service record, all that. But there's a difference between theoretical knowledge and practical leadership. Marines follow strength, not academic credentials." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Hayes, a seasoned officer whose reputation for fairness and competence had earned her respect throughout the base. Hayes had served alongside some of the most effective commanders in the Marine Corps, and her opinion carried significant weight with the enlisted personnel. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. "Mind if I join you?" Hayes asked, settling into an empty chair without waiting for a response. The Marine straightened slightly, but Hayes had always maintained an informal rapport with the senior NCOs under her command. "We were just discussing the new captain," Cole said carefully, aware that criticism of superior officers required diplomatic phrasing. Hayes nodded knowingly. "I figured as much. What's the consensus?" Brooks glanced around the table before responding. "Ma'am, with respect, we're concerned about her ability to command Marines in combat situations. Her communication style seems unsuited to the realities of battlefield leadership." Hayes considered this for a moment, her expression revealing nothing about her own thoughts on the matter. "That's interesting, Sergeant. What do you think battlefield leadership looks like?" The question seemed straightforward, but Hayes had a reputation for asking questions that revealed more than they initially appeared to. Cole took the bait first. "Ma'am, in my experience, effective command requires the ability to project authority, to make your voice heard above the chaos, to inspire confidence through strength and decisive action. Marines need to know that their leader can handle whatever gets thrown at them." "And you don't think Captain Richardson can do that?" Hayes pressed. Zhang spoke up this time. "Ma'am, it's not that we think she's incompetent, it's just that her style seems more suited to staff work than field command. She speaks like she's addressing a seminar, not leading Marines." Hayes nodded thoughtfully. "You know, I had similar concerns when I first met her. Very different from the commanding officers I was used to serving under." She paused, seeming to weigh her words carefully. "But I've learned that leadership comes in many forms. Sometimes, the most effective leaders are the ones who don't need to shout to be heard." The comment was diplomatically phrased, but it didn't address the fundamental concerns the Marines had about Janet's ability to lead under pressure. If anything, it reinforced their perception that she was being defended by superior officers who hadn't seen combat and didn't understand the realities of battlefield leadership. After Hayes left, the conversation resumed with renewed intensity. The Marines began sharing stories of commanders who had earned their respect through demonstrated competence under fire, contrasting these examples with their limited impression of Janet's leadership style. The pattern of skepticism that emerged from these conversations began to manifest itself in subtle ways throughout the battalion. During morning formations, Marines would position themselves toward the back, claiming they couldn't hear Janet's instructions clearly. In training exercises, there would be momentary delays as Marines asked for clarification of orders that had been delivered in her characteristically quiet tone. The resistance wasn't overt enough to constitute insubordination, but it was persistent enough to undermine the efficiency and cohesion that effective military units required. Janet noticed these patterns immediately, but her response surprised everyone who expected her to assert her authority more forcefully. Instead of raising her voice or demanding compliance, Janet began adapting her leadership style to work around the resistance. She started using visual aids during briefings, ensuring that written instructions accompanied verbal orders. She positioned herself strategically during formations to maximize the effectiveness of her quiet voice. She began scheduling smaller group meetings where her communication style would be more effective. The adaptations were professional and pragmatic, but they were also interpreted by many Marines as evidence of weakness. Leaders, in their experience, commanded respect through strength and authority. Janet's willingness to accommodate their resistance seemed to confirm their suspicions about her unsuitability for command. The situation escalated during a field training exercise designed to test the battalion's readiness for deployment. The scenario involved coordinated movement across difficult terrain, with multiple squads operating semi-independently while maintaining communication with Central Command. Janet positioned herself at the field command post, surrounded by radio equipment and tactical displays that would allow her to monitor the exercise without interfering unnecessarily. Her role was to provide oversight and coordination, intervening only if safety concerns arose or if the training objectives required adjustment. The exercise began smoothly enough, with squads moving efficiently toward their assigned objectives. But as the morning progressed, subtle signs of resistance began to emerge. Radio checks took longer than necessary, with Marines claiming difficulty hearing Janet's transmissions. Movement coordination became less precise as squad leaders made tactical decisions without consulting Central Command. Staff Sergeant Cole's squad, operating on the northern flank of the exercise area, encountered a simulated obstacle that required coordination with adjacent units. Under normal circumstances, this would have been a routine request for support, handled through standard communication protocols. But when Cole's radio operator contacted the command post, the exchange revealed the depth of skepticism that had developed toward Janet's leadership. "Command, this is Alpha Squad. We have a simulated IED blocking our primary route, requesting permission to coordinate with Bravo Squad." Janet's response came through clearly, her voice carrying the calm professionalism that characterized all her communications. "Alpha Squad, this is Command. Permission granted for coordination with Bravo Squad. Be advised that Charlie Squad is operating in Sector 7. The response was tactically sound and demonstrated awareness of the broader operational picture. But Cole's reaction revealed the prejudice that had developed against Janet's leadership style. "Roger, Command," he responded, his tone carrying just enough skepticism to be noticeable. "We'll coordinate with Bravo Squad and see if we can make this work." The phrase, "see if we can make this work," was a subtle but unmistakable expression of doubt about the feasibility of Janet's tactical suggestion. It implied that her instructions were theoretical rather than practical, that her understanding of the situation was incomplete. Similar patterns emerged throughout the exercise. Marines followed Janet's orders, but they did so with a reluctance that suggested they were humoring her rather than trusting her judgment. Squad leaders made tactical decisions that technically complied with her instructions while clearly indicating their belief that alternative approaches would be more effective. Janet observed these dynamics with the kind of analytical detachment that had served her well in previous assignments. She understood that the resistance she was encountering wasn't personal animosity, but rather a clash between different concepts of leadership. These Marines had learned to respect commanders who projected authority through volume and aggressive confidence. Her quiet, analytical approach violated their expectations about what effective leadership looked like. But Janet also understood something that her Marines didn't. Respect couldn't be demanded or assigned. It had to be earned through demonstrated competence under pressure. She had faced similar skepticism in previous assignments, and she had learned that arguing with prejudice was less effective than simply proving it wrong. The exercise concluded without major incidents, but the debriefing session revealed the extent to which the battalion's confidence in Janet's leadership had eroded. Marines provided feedback that was technically respectful, but clearly indicated their reservations about her command style. "Ma'am," Cole said during the group discussion, "the coordination with adjacent units worked, but it felt like we were operating with incomplete information. In combat situations, we need commanders who can see the bigger picture and communicate it effectively. The comment was diplomatically phrased, but its meaning was clear. Janet's quiet communication style was inadequate for the complex coordination required in combat situations. Other Marines offered similar feedback, couching their criticism in professional language while making it clear that they had serious doubts about her ability to lead them in actual combat operations. Janet listened to each comment with the same quiet attention she brought to everything else, taking notes and asking clarifying questions that demonstrated her commitment to understanding their concerns. But her responses remained characteristically measured and analytical, reinforcing rather than challenging their perception of her as someone more suited to academic environments than battlefield command. As the Marines filed out of the debriefing room, the conversations that followed made it clear that their skepticism had hardened into something approaching rejection. They spoke about Janet as someone who might be intelligent and well-educated, but who lacked the fundamental qualities required for effective military leadership. What none of them realized was that they were about to face a situation that would test every assumption they had made about leadership, authority, and the qualities that separated exceptional commanders from merely competent ones. The real test of Janet Richardson's capabilities was approaching faster than anyone expected, and it would reveal truths about leadership that would challenge everything these Marines thought they knew about command and respect. The situation at Camp Lejeune deteriorated significantly over the following 2 weeks, as the Marines of the 2nd Battalion developed increasingly sophisticated methods of undermining authority without crossing the line into formal insubordination. What had begun as skeptical murmurs in the mess hall evolved into a systematic passive resistance that threatened to destroy unit cohesion entirely. Staff Sergeant Marcus Cole had emerged as the unofficial leader of this resistance movement, though he was careful to maintain plausible deniability about his role in organizing it. His influence among the senior NCOs was substantial, earned through years of demonstrated competence in combat situations that had forged bonds stronger than any formal chain of command. The resistance manifested itself in ways that were subtle but unmistakable to anyone familiar with military culture. During morning formations, Marines would arrange themselves in patterns that made it difficult for Janet's quiet voice to reach the entire assembly effectively. Equipment checks would take longer than necessary, with Marines claiming they hadn't heard specific instructions clearly. Training schedules would experience mysterious delays, as squads requested clarification of orders that had been communicated with Janet's characteristic precision. Movement coordination became increasingly loose as individual units made tactical decisions without contacting Central Command. The most serious incident occurred during a simulated building clearance operation that required precise timing between 3 different squads. Janet was monitoring the operation from the Tactical Operations Center, coordinating movement through multiple radio channels while tracking the positions of all friendly forces in real time. The operation required Alpha Squad to secure the building's ground floor, while Bravo Squad cleared the upper levels and Charlie Squad established perimeter security. Success depended on synchronizing these movements to prevent simulated friendly fire incidents and ensure complete coverage of the target area. Janet's instructions were characteristically precise and delivered in her quiet but clear voice. Alpha Squad, begin ground floor clearance at time hack 0430. Bravo Squad, initiate upper level movement 30 seconds after Alpha reports first floor secure. Charlie Squad, maintain perimeter and report any movement in adjacent buildings. The timing was crucial, and Janet had calculated the intervals based on her analysis of each squad's movement capabilities and the tactical requirements of the scenario. But Staff Sergeant Cole, leading Alpha Squad, chose to interpret her instructions more loosely than the situation required. "Roger, Command," Cole responded, his tone carrying the subtle dismissiveness that had become characteristic of his interactions with Janet. "Alpha Squad, beginning ground floor movement." What Cole didn't mention was that he had decided to modify Janet's tactical plan based on his own assessment of the situation. Instead of following the precise timing she had specified, he accelerated his squad's movement through the building, believing that his combat experience gave him better insight into the tactical requirements than Janet's theoretical analysis. The modification created a cascade of problems throughout the operation. Bravo Squad, following Janet's original timeline, found themselves entering the upper level before Alpha Squad had completed their clearance of the ground floor. The overlap created confusion about areas of responsibility and resulted in simulated friendly fire incidents that would have been catastrophic in actual combat. Charlie Squad, monitoring the situation from their perimeter positions, reported the tactical confusion to Janet. "Command, this is Charlie Squad. We're seeing movement coordination issues between Alpha and Bravo. Recommend immediate tactical adjustment." Janet's response demonstrated the analytical capability that had earned her previous commendations, but it also revealed the growing disconnect between her leadership style and the expectations of her Marines. "Charlie Squad, I copy your report. Alpha Squad, report your current position and clearance status immediately." Cole's response was delayed and grudging. "Command, this is Alpha Squad. We've modified our approach based on tactical conditions and are currently clearing the second section of the ground floor." The phrase "modified our approach" was a military euphemism for disobeying orders, and everyone monitoring the radio frequency understood its implications. Cole was essentially announcing that he had overruled Janet's tactical plan because he believed his judgment was superior to hers. Janet faced a critical decision point. She could assert her authority by demanding immediate compliance with her original orders, potentially creating a confrontation that would be witnessed by the entire battalion. Alternatively, she could adapt her plan to accommodate Cole's unauthorized modifications, but doing so would signal acceptance of his insubordination and further undermine her authority. Her response surprised everyone listening. "All stations, this is command. We are implementing tactical modification Alpha 7. Alpha Squad, continue your current approach and report when the ground floor is completely secure. Bravo Squad, hold your current position until Alpha provides all clear. Charlie Squad, extend perimeter coverage to compensate for modified internal movement." The decision to adapt rather than confront was tactically sound and prevented the training exercise from devolving into complete chaos. But it was also interpreted by many Marines as further evidence of Janet's inability to command respect and maintain discipline within the unit. The exercise concluded without additional incidents, but the damage to Janet's authority was significant. During the post-exercise debriefing, the discussion revealed the depth of skepticism that had developed throughout the battalion. "Ma'am," Cole said during the group analysis, his tone respectful but carrying an undertone of condescension, "the tactical modifications worked out, but in combat situations, we need command structures that can adapt to changing conditions without compromising unit integrity." The comment was carefully phrased to sound like constructive feedback, but its real message was clear. Janet's leadership style was inadequate for the fluid decision-making required in combat. Other Marines offered similar observations, couching their criticism in professional language while making it clear that they had fundamental doubts about her ability to maintain command authority under pressure. The consensus was that while Janet might be intelligent and well-intentioned, she lacked the fundamental qualities required for effective battlefield leadership. Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Hayes, who had been observing the exercise, found herself in an increasingly difficult position. She understood the Marines' concerns about Janet's unconventional leadership style, but she also knew details about Janet's background and capabilities that couldn't be shared due to classification restrictions. After the debriefing, Hayes requested a private meeting with Janet to discuss the deteriorating situation within the battalion. They met in Hayes's office, a Spartanly furnished space that reflected the practical mindset of a career military officer. "Captain," Hayes began carefully, "I'm concerned about the dynamics I'm observing within your battalion. The resistance you're encountering seems to be becoming more organized and more systematic." Janet nodded, her expression revealing none of the frustration she must have been feeling. "Yes, ma'am, I'm aware of the situation. The Marines have legitimate concerns about leadership styles that differ from their previous experiences. Hayes studied Janet's face, looking for signs of the stress that would be natural under such circumstances. How are you planning to address this? The current trajectory isn't sustainable. Either you establish your authority definitively, or the situation will continue to deteriorate. Ma'am, Janet replied in her characteristically quiet voice, I believe that respect has to be earned through demonstrated competence rather than demanded through assertions of authority. These Marines will follow me when they see evidence that I can lead them effectively. The response was idealistic and professionally admirable, but Hayes worried that it might be naive given the realities of military culture. Marines were conditioned to respect strength and authority, and Janet's willingness to accommodate resistance might be perceived as weakness rather than flexibility. Janet's response revealed the confidence that had earned her previous assignments despite her unconventional leadership style. Ma'am, I faced similar skepticism in previous assignments. Experience has taught me that Marines who are given the opportunity to see effective leadership will recognize it, regardless of whether it matches their preconceptions. Hayes hoped Janet was right, but she also understood that the current situation couldn't continue indefinitely. The battalion was scheduled for deployment within 8 weeks, and unit cohesion was essential for operational effectiveness. If Janet couldn't establish her authority soon, personnel changes might become necessary. The conversation was interrupted by an urgent communication from the Base Operations Center. A message had arrived through classified channels that would change everything about the situation at Camp Lejeune. The intelligence report indicated elevated terrorist activity in the region where the 2nd Battalion was scheduled to deploy, with specific threats targeting American military installations. The deployment timeline had been accelerated, and the battalion would be shipping out in 3 weeks instead of 8. More importantly, recent intelligence suggested that their first assignment would involve exactly the kind of complex urban warfare scenarios that required the highest levels of unit coordination and tactical flexibility. As Hayes briefed Janet on the new intelligence, both officers understood that the brewing crisis of leadership within the battalion had just become a critical operational concern. The Marines who had been undermining Janet's authority through passive resistance were about to face situations where effective command and control would be matters of life and death. The stakes had suddenly escalated far beyond questions of leadership style and military protocol. The 500 Marines of the 2nd Battalion were about to deploy into an operational environment where their survival would depend on the very qualities of leadership and coordination that had been deteriorating under Janet's command. What none of them realized was that the crisis they were about to face would reveal truths about leadership, combat effectiveness, and military competence that would challenge every assumption they had made about Janet Richardson and her ability to command Marines in battle. The emergency alert sounded at 0347 hours on a Tuesday morning that would forever change how the Marines of the 2nd Battalion viewed leadership, courage, and the true meaning of command authority. The piercing wail of the base alarm system cut through the pre-dawn darkness, jolting 500 Marines from their sleep and setting in motion a chain of events that would test every assumption they had made about Captain Janet Richardson. The Situation Room at Camp Lejeune became a hive of urgent activity as intelligence officers, communication specialists, and senior command personnel converged to assess a developing crisis. The initial reports were fragmentary but alarming. A coordinated terrorist attack was underway at Forward Operating Base Razor, located 200 miles northeast of their position, where a Marine logistics unit was providing support for ongoing operations in the region. Colonel James Morrison, the base commander, stood before a wall of tactical displays that showed real-time satellite imagery, communication intercepts, and casualty reports streaming in from the besieged outpost. His weathered face reflected the gravity of a situation that was rapidly spiraling beyond the capabilities of conventional response protocols. The attack began at 0315 hours, Morrison announced to the assembled officers, his voice carrying the controlled urgency of someone accustomed to crisis management. Initial estimates suggest a coordinated assault by at least 60 hostile combatants using advanced tactics and equipment. The base is effectively surrounded, communications are intermittent, and casualties are mounting. Janet stood among the officers, her quiet presence unremarkable in the controlled chaos of the Situation Room. But as Morrison continued his briefing, it became clear that the unfolding crisis would require exactly the kind of complex operational response that had been the subject of so much skepticism from her Marines. The logistics unit at FOB Razor consists of 47 personnel, primarily support staff with limited combat training, Morrison continued. They're holding defensive positions, but intelligence indicates the attacking force is equipped with heavy weapons and appears to be implementing a siege strategy designed to prevent evacuation or reinforcement. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes stepped forward, her expression reflecting the tactical complexity of the situation. "Sir, what are our options for immediate response? Standard air support is complicated by the terrain and weather conditions, and ground reinforcement would take at least 8 hours even with emergency deployment protocols." Morrison's response revealed why Janet had been specifically assigned to command the 2nd Battalion, though none of the Marines listening understood the full implications. "There is one option. We have a rapid deployment capability that could get a reinforcement unit to FOB Razor within 4 hours, but it would require the kind of complex coordination and tactical flexibility that only our most experienced commanders could handle." The room fell silent as the implications became clear. The 2nd Battalion was the only unit at Camp Lejeune with the training and equipment necessary for the kind of rapid deployment operation that could reach FOB Razor in time to make a difference. Morrison looked directly at Janet, his expression reflecting nothing about his confidence in her abilities. "Captain Richardson, I need to know if your battalion is prepared for immediate deployment in support of emergency relief operations. This isn't a training exercise, this is the real thing, and Marines are dying while we talk." Janet's response was delivered in the same quiet, measured tone that had been the subject of so much criticism from her Marines. But the words carried implications that would reverberate throughout the entire operation. "Sir, the 2nd Battalion is ready for deployment. We can have 500 Marines wheels up within 2 hours and on the ground at FOB Razor within 4. The commitment was extraordinary, representing the kind of rapid deployment capability that required months of preparation and the highest levels of unit coordination. But Morrison's next question revealed the true complexity of what Janet was proposing. "Captain, the terrain around FOB Razor is mountainous and heavily forested. Landing zones are limited, and the tactical situation is fluid. This operation will require real-time coordination of air assets, ground forces, and fire support elements, while adapting to changing conditions. Are you confident that your battalion can execute this level of complexity?" Janet's answer would become the defining moment of her career, though she delivered it with the same quiet professionalism that had characterized every other aspect of her leadership. "Sir, my Marines are trained for exactly this type of operation. We'll get them there, and we'll bring everyone home." The confidence in her voice was absolute, but many of the officers in the Situation Room were thinking about the reports of resistance and skepticism that had been circulating throughout the base. Could a commanding officer who couldn't command respect from her own Marines in training exercises really coordinate a complex combat operation under life-and-death conditions? Morrison made the decision that would test every theory about leadership, authority, and military effectiveness. "Captain Richardson, you have authorization for immediate deployment. This is Operation Rescue Dawn, and you have complete tactical authority for all aspects of the mission." The next 30 minutes were a masterclass in military logistics and coordination as Janet began orchestrating the most complex rapid deployment operation in the battalion's history. Her quiet voice became the central thread connecting dozens of different elements: aircraft coordination, equipment loading, intelligence briefing, medical preparation, and tactical planning. In the battalion barracks, Marines who had been mocking Janet's leadership style just hours earlier found themselves responding to her commands with growing amazement. The woman who had seemed so unsuited for battlefield leadership was demonstrating organizational capabilities that exceeded anything they had previously witnessed. Staff Sergeant Marcus Cole, roused from sleep by the emergency alert, initially assumed that another officer would be taking command of the deployment operation. His skepticism about Janet's abilities had hardened over the weeks of passive resistance, and he couldn't imagine that she would be capable of coordinating a real combat operation. But as he reported to the assembly area with his squad, Cole began to witness something that challenged every assumption he had made about effective leadership. Janet was everywhere at once, coordinating with air support elements, briefing squad leaders on tactical requirements, reviewing intelligence updates, and ensuring that every aspect of the deployment proceeded with precision timing. Her voice remained characteristically quiet, but her commands carried an authority that seemed to emerge from competence rather than volume. Marines who had been questioning her leadership just days earlier found themselves hanging on her every word, recognizing that their lives might depend on understanding her instructions completely. "Alpha Squad," Janet addressed Cole's unit, her voice clear despite the noise of aircraft engines and loading equipment. "You'll be responsible for establishing the initial perimeter once we're on the ground. The terrain is challenging, but I need you to secure a 200-meter radius around the landing zone to allow for medical evacuation of wounded personnel from FOB Razor." Cole nodded, his earlier skepticism replaced by growing respect for the precision of her planning. The tactical requirements she was outlining were complex and dangerous, but her understanding of the operational challenges was clearly comprehensive. Sergeant First Class David Brooks, checking his equipment one final time before boarding the transport aircraft, found himself reflecting on the transformation he was witnessing. The quiet woman who had seemed so out of place in their aggressive military culture was demonstrating leadership capabilities that exceeded those of any commanding officer he had served under. "Bravo Squad," Janet continued, addressing Brooks' unit, "you'll be responsible for establishing communication links between our position and FOB Razor. The terrain will interfere with standard radio protocols, so I need you to position relay stations at specific coordinates that I'll provide once we assess the ground situation." The complexity of the communication requirements was staggering, requiring real-time adaptation to conditions that couldn't be fully assessed until they were on the ground. But Janet's confidence in her tactical plan was evident, and Marines who had been questioning her competence were beginning to understand that they might have been wrong about everything. Corporal Lisa Zhang, boarding the lead transport aircraft, caught herself thinking about all the conversations in which she had expressed doubts about Janet's ability to lead Marines in combat. The woman coordinating their deployment with such precision and authority bore little resemblance to the uncertain figure she had imagined. As the aircraft engines reached full power and the first wave of Marines prepared for takeoff, Janet made one final radio check with each squad leader. Her voice came through clearly on every frequency, coordinating timing, reviewing tactical objectives, and ensuring that every Marine understood their role in the operation. "All stations, this is command," Janet's voice carried over the radio systems with absolute clarity. "We have Marines under fire who are depending on us. This is what we trained for. This is why we're Marines. Execute the mission, bring everyone home." The aircraft lifted off into the pre-dawn darkness, carrying 500 Marines toward their first real test under Janet's command. But something had already changed during the deployment preparation. The Marines who had been questioning her leadership were beginning to understand that they might have been judging her by the wrong standards entirely. Staff Sergeant Cole, strapped into his seat as the transport aircraft gained altitude, found himself thinking about the precision with which Janet had coordinated every aspect of their deployment. The woman who had dismissed as unsuited for combat leadership had just orchestrated a complex military operation with a level of competence that exceeded anything he had previously witnessed. The 4-hour flight to FOB Razor would give the Marines time to reflect on what they had just experienced, but it would also give them time to prepare for what was waiting for them on the ground. The terrorist attack was ongoing, casualties were mounting, and their mission would require exactly the kind of tactical flexibility and leadership that had been the subject of so much skepticism. As the aircraft flew through the darkness toward their destination, Janet reviewed her tactical plans one final time. She understood that the next few hours would either vindicate her leadership style or prove her critics right. But she also understood something that her Marines were just beginning to discover. Effective leadership wasn't about meeting expectations, it was about exceeding them when it mattered most. The real test was still ahead of them, and 47 Marines at Fob Razor were depending on their success. The landing zone at Fob Razor was a nightmare of smoke, intermittent gunfire, and the acrid smell of burning fuel that spoke to the desperation of the situation the 500 Marines of the 2nd Battalion were flying toward. As their transport aircraft began their descent through the pre-dawn darkness, Janet Richardson sat calmly reviewing tactical maps while around her, Marines who had spent weeks questioning her leadership were about to witness a demonstration of combat command that would redefine their understanding of military excellence. The initial intelligence reports had been fragmentary, but as the aircraft approached the landing zone, the full scope of the crisis became clear through radio communications with the besieged Marines at Fob Razor. The terrorist attack had been meticulously planned, with coordinated strikes on communication equipment, fuel storage, and defensive positions that suggested intelligence gathering and tactical sophistication far beyond typical insurgent operations. Captain Sarah Mitchell, the logistics unit commander at Fob Razor, had been maintaining sporadic radio contact with Camp Lejeune throughout the night. Her voice carried the exhaustion and stress of someone who had been coordinating desperate defensive actions while watching her Marines fall wounded around her. "Camp Lejeune, this is Fob Razor Actual." Mitchell's transmission crackled through the static of damaged communications equipment. "We have 17 wounded, including 4 critical cases requiring immediate medical evacuation. Hostile forces have established positions on the ridgeline overlooking our compound and are maintaining sustained fire on our defensive positions." Janet's response came through clearly, her quiet voice somehow managing to convey both authority and reassurance despite the chaos surrounding the radio communications. "Fob Razor Actual, this is Rescue Dawn Command. We are approximately 15 minutes from touchdown with 500 Marines and full medical support. Maintain your current defensive positions and prepare to mark wounded personnel for immediate evacuation." The precision of Janet's communication was remarkable given the complexity of the situation she was coordinating. She was simultaneously managing the approach of multiple transport aircraft, coordinating with air support elements, reviewing real-time intelligence updates, and maintaining tactical awareness of the ground situation at Fob Razor. Staff Sergeant Marcus Cole, sitting across from Janet in the lead transport, found himself watching her coordinate the operation with growing amazement. The woman he had dismissed as unsuited for combat leadership was demonstrating tactical awareness and organizational capability that exceeded anything he had witnessed in his 12 years of military service. Janet's quiet voice cut through the aircraft noise as she addressed her squad leaders one final time before landing. "Alpha Squad, upon touchdown, you'll move immediately to establish overwatch positions on the eastern ridgeline. Intelligence indicates hostile sniper positions that must be neutralized before we can begin medical evacuation." Cole nodded, his earlier skepticism replaced by recognition that Janet's tactical understanding was both comprehensive and precisely calibrated to the specific challenges they would face on the ground. "Bravo Squad," Janet continued, turning to Sergeant First Class David Brooks, "you'll be responsible for securing the landing zone and establishing casualty collection points. The wounded Marines need immediate triage and preparation for medical evacuation, but we need to ensure secure perimeters before moving critical patients." Brooks listened intently, understanding that the coordination Janet was describing required split-second timing and precise execution under fire. The complexity of managing combat operations while simultaneously conducting medical evacuation was staggering, but Janet's confidence suggested she had prepared for exactly this type of scenario. "Charlie Squad," she addressed Corporal Lisa Zong's unit, "you'll advance directly toward Fob Razor to reinforce their defensive positions and assess their ammunition and supply situation. They've been under sustained attack for over 4 hours, and they may be running low on essential supplies." Zong found herself thinking about all the times she had questioned Janet's understanding of combat realities. The tactical plan Janet was outlining demonstrated not only theoretical knowledge but practical awareness of the specific challenges that prolonged defensive actions create for isolated units. As the transport aircraft made their final approach to the landing zone, the full scope of the tactical situation became visible through the aircraft windows. FOB Razor was surrounded by hostile positions established on elevated terrain that provided commanding fields of fire over the compound. Smoke from burning buildings obscured visibility, and the intermittent muzzle flashes of ongoing gunfire indicated that the battle was far from over. Janet keyed her radio microphone, her voice remaining calm despite the obvious dangers visible through the aircraft windows. "All stations, this is command. We're going into a hot landing zone with active hostile fire. Execute your assignments immediately upon touchdown, maintain communication discipline, and remember that 47 Marines are depending on our success." The aircraft touched down in a chaos of rotor wash, defensive gunfire, and the controlled urgency of Marines deploying into active combat. But what happened next would become legendary in Marine Corps history, studied in military academies and referenced in leadership courses for decades to come. Janet's quiet voice became the central coordination point for one of the most complex combat operations any of these Marines had ever participated in. While her squads deployed according to their assigned missions, she established a tactical command post that maintained real-time communication with every element of the operation. Alpha Squad, led by Cole, advanced toward the eastern ridgeline under Janet's precise coordination. Her voice guided their movement through terrain features that provided cover while directing them toward optimal firing positions for engaging the hostile sniper positions. "Alpha Squad, this is command." Her voice came through clearly despite the background noise of combat. "Hostile position identified at grid reference 247-891, approximately 400 meters northeast of your current location. Recommend approach through the ravine system to avoid direct fire exposure." Cole's squad moved according to Janet's guidance, and within 20 minutes they had successfully neutralized 3 sniper positions that had been maintaining suppressive fire on FOB Razor throughout the night. The tactical intelligence Janet had provided was accurate down to specific ranges and approach routes, demonstrating battlefield awareness that exceeded anything Cole had previously encountered. Meanwhile, Bravo Squad was executing the most challenging aspect of the operation, establishing secure casualty collection points while under intermittent fire. Brooks coordinated with Janet to position his Marines in locations that provided both tactical security and medical accessibility. Bravo Squad's Marines moved with precision that reflected their confidence in Janet's tactical coordination. The positions she had selected provided optimal security while allowing medical personnel to work effectively despite the ongoing combat operations. Charlie Squad's mission to reinforce FOB Razor revealed the full extent of Janet's tactical preparation. She had studied not only the terrain and defensive positions, but also the specific capabilities and limitations of the logistics unit that had been under siege. "Charlie Squad, this is command." Janet coordinated Zong's movement toward the compound. "FOB Razor reports low ammunition for their crew-served weapons and requests priority resupply of 7.62 ammunition and medical supplies. Coordinate with their logistics personnel to identify specific requirements." Zong's squad reached the compound perimeter and established contact with Captain Mitchell's Marines, who had been maintaining defensive positions for over 5 hours. The coordination Janet had provided proved essential for integrating the relief force with the existing defensive structure without compromising either unit's effectiveness. But the most remarkable demonstration of Janet's capabilities came when the tactical situation changed unexpectedly. Intelligence reports indicated that additional hostile forces were approaching from the south, potentially trapping both the original FOB Razor garrison and the 500 Marines of the relief force. The situation required immediate tactical adaptation, the kind of real-time decision-making that separated exceptional commanders from merely competent ones. Janet's response demonstrated why she had been specifically selected for this command despite the skepticism of her Marines. "All stations, this is command." Her voice carried absolute authority despite maintaining its characteristic quiet tone. Intelligence reports additional hostile forces approaching from the south. We are implementing a tactical modification Bravo 4. Alpha Squad, extend your perimeter to cover southern approaches. Bravo Squad, accelerate casualty evacuation procedures. Charlie Squad, coordinate with FOB Razor for defensive preparation. The tactical modification Janet announced required complex coordination between units that were already engaged in demanding operations. But her Marines responded with precision that reflected their growing confidence in her leadership. Cole's Alpha Squad repositioned to cover the new threat axis while maintaining their suppression of the original hostile positions. Brooks' Bravo Squad accelerated their casualty collection and evacuation procedures without compromising medical care for the wounded Marines. Zhang's Charlie Squad worked with the FOB Razor garrison to strengthen defensive positions against the approaching threat. The tactical modification Janet announced required complex coordination between units that were already engaged in demanding operations. But her Marines responded with precision that reflected their growing confidence in her leadership. Cole's Alpha Squad repositioned to cover the new threat axis while maintaining their suppression of the original hostile positions. Brooks' Bravo Squad accelerated their casualty collection and evacuation procedures without compromising medical care for the wounded Marines. Zhang's Charlie Squad worked with the FOB Razor garrison to strengthen defensive positions against the approaching threat. The operation that followed was a masterpiece of tactical coordination executed under the most challenging combat conditions. Janet's quiet voice provided the central thread that connected every aspect of the operation, coordinating fire support, medical evacuation, defensive positioning, and supply distribution with precision that exceeded anything these Marines had previously experienced. The hostile forces approaching from the south encountered a coordinated defense that had been prepared with tactical intelligence and positioning that neutralized their advantage of surprise. The Marines under Janet's command executed defensive operations that demonstrated the highest levels of training and leadership. When the medical evacuation helicopters arrived to extract the wounded Marines from FOB Razor, they landed in secure zones that had been established through precise tactical coordination. When ammunition resupply was required, it was delivered to positions that had been selected for optimal distribution and security. Throughout the entire operation, which lasted 7 hours and involved coordination of air support, ground forces, medical evacuation, and supply operations, Janet Richardson's quiet voice remained the constant that held everything together. She never raised her voice, never showed panic, never lost tactical awareness of the complex, multifaceted operation she was coordinating. By the time the last wounded Marine had been evacuated and the tactical situation had been stabilized, every Marine in the 2nd Battalion understood that they had witnessed something extraordinary. The woman they had dismissed as unsuited for combat leadership had just coordinated one of the most successful combat operations in recent Marine Corps history. But the full extent of Janet's capabilities was still to be revealed, and the Marines who had followed her into battle were about to learn truths about her background that would explain everything they had witnessed. The secure briefing room at Camp Lejeune had never hosted a gathering quite like the one that took place 48 hours after Operation Rescue Dawn. General Elizabeth Hawthorne, commanding officer of the Marine Expeditionary Force, sat at the head of a polished conference table, surrounded by personnel files marked with classification levels that most of the Marines present had never encountered. The successful rescue operation at FOB Razor had attracted attention from the highest levels of military command, and answers were finally going to be provided about Captain Janet Richardson's true background and capabilities. Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Hayes, Colonel James Morrison, and the senior NCOs of the 2nd Battalion filed into the room with expressions that reflected their confusion about this unprecedented gathering. Staff Sergeant Marcus Cole, Sergeant First Class David Brooks, and Corporal Lisa Zhang had been specifically requested to attend, though none of them understood why their presence was required at what appeared to be a high-level command briefing. General Hawthorne was a legendary figure in Marine Corps circles, a combat veteran whose reputation for excellence and integrity had earned her respect throughout the military establishment. Her presence at Camp Lejeune for this briefing indicated that Operation Rescue Dawn had implications far beyond a successful rescue mission. Ladies and gentlemen, General Hawthorne began, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to commanding the attention of senior military officials. You are here because you have served with and under Captain Janet Richardson during what may be one of the most significant operations in recent Marine Corps history. What you accomplished at FOB Razor will be studied in military academies for decades, but more importantly, you have witnessed capabilities and leadership that deserve explanation. She opened the first of several classified folders arranged in front of her, each marked with security classifications that immediately commanded the attention of everyone present. Before I proceed, I need to emphasize that what you are about to learn has been classified at the highest levels for operational security reasons. Captain Richardson's true background and previous assignments have been concealed to protect ongoing operations and maintain her effectiveness as a tactical asset. The room fell completely silent as the implications of General Hawthorne's words became clear. The Marines, who had spent weeks questioning Janet's qualifications, were about to learn that their assumptions had been based on incomplete and deliberately misleading information. Captain Richardson graduated from Princeton University with dual degrees in international relations and applied mathematics, completing both programs summa cum laude while simultaneously participating in Reserve Officer Training Corps. General Hawthorne began reading from the file. But what makes her unique isn't her academic achievements. It's what happened during her first assignment after Officer Candidate School. She turned to a page marked with security stamps and classification markings. Captain Richardson's first deployment was not, as indicated in her standard personnel file, with a communications unit in Germany. Her actual assignment was with Marine Forces Special Operations Command, where she spent 18 months as a tactical coordinator for operations that remain classified to this day. Staff Sergeant Cole felt his worldview shifting as he listened to information that completely contradicted everything he thought he knew about Janet's background. Special Operations Command assignments were reserved for the most elite Marines, those who had demonstrated exceptional capabilities under the most challenging conditions. During her time with MARSOC, Captain Richardson coordinated 17 separate operations in 3 different theaters, including several that required the kind of complex tactical coordination you witnessed at FOB Razor. General Hawthorne continued, "Her performance was so exceptional that she was specifically recruited for assignment to an even more specialized unit." General Hawthorne opened another file, this one marked with classifications that made several people in the room shift uncomfortably. For the past 3 years, Captain Richardson has been assigned to the Marine Corps Intelligence Activity, where she has served as a tactical coordinator for operations involving Joint Special Operations Forces, CIA assets, and foreign military units in some of the most dangerous operational environments in the world. The revelation was staggering. Marine Corps intelligence activity assignments were so classified that most Marines never even knew the organization existed. The fact that Janet had been working at that level for 3 years explained capabilities that had seemed impossible for someone with her apparent background and experience. Sergeant First Class Brooks found himself thinking about all the times he had questioned Janet's understanding of combat realities. The woman he had dismissed as academically qualified but practically inexperienced had apparently been coordinating special operations missions while he was conducting routine training exercises. The reason Captain Richardson was assigned to command the 2nd Battalion, General Hawthorne explained, is that intelligence agencies had identified a high-probability terrorist threat in this region. The attack on FOB Razor was not an isolated incident, but part of a larger coordinated campaign that required the most experienced tactical coordinators available. She pulled out satellite photographs and intelligence reports that showed the scope of the terrorist organization responsible for the FOB Razor attack. The images revealed training camps, equipment stockpiles, and organizational structures that indicated sophisticated planning and significant resources. Captain Richardson was specifically chosen for this assignment because her previous experience coordinating multi-unit operations in hostile environments made her uniquely qualified to handle the kind of complex tactical challenges we anticipated. Her unconventional leadership style wasn't a limitation, it was a carefully developed capability that has proven effective in operations involving diverse units with different training backgrounds and command structures. The explanation provided context for everything the Marines had witnessed during Operation Rescue Dawn, but it also forced them to confront the extent to which they had misjudged Janet's capabilities based on superficial characteristics and cultural biases. Corporal Zhang raised her hand tentatively. "Ma'am, if Captain Richardson had this level of experience and qualifications, why wasn't this information available to help us understand her background?" General Hawthorne's response revealed the complexity of modern military operations and the challenges of maintaining operational security while building unit cohesion. Corporal, Captain Richardson's assignments have involved operations where her identity and capabilities needed to remain concealed from potential hostile intelligence gathering. Making her true background known would have compromised ongoing operations and potentially endangered Marines in classified missions. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes, who had been struggling with the command dynamics within the 2nd Battalion, asked the question that had been troubling her for weeks. "General, how should we have handled the integration challenges?" The Marine skepticism was understandable given the information available to them. General Hawthorne's response demonstrated why she had achieved her current rank and reputation. Colonel Hayes, this situation was anticipated and accepted as a necessary cost of maintaining operational security. Captain Richardson understood that she would face skepticism and resistance, and her response to those challenges was itself a test of her leadership capabilities under adverse conditions. She turned to address the senior NCOs directly. "Staff Sergeant Cole, Sergeant Brooks, Corporal Zhang, your skepticism was natural and understandable. Marine Corps culture emphasizes aggressive, assertive leadership styles because those approaches are effective in many combat situations. But Captain Richardson represents a different model of leadership, one that has proven successful in operations requiring coordination of diverse assets under complex conditions and command structures." The explanation provided context for everything the Marines had witnessed during Operation Rescue Dawn, but it also forced them to confront the extent to which they had misjudged Janet's capabilities based on superficial characteristics and cultural biases. Corporal Zhang raised her hand tentatively. "Ma'am, if Captain Richardson had this level of experience and qualifications, why wasn't this information available to help us understand her background?" General Hawthorne's response revealed the complexity of modern military operations and the challenges of maintaining operational security while building unit cohesion. "Corporal, Captain Richardson, this situation was anticipated and accepted as a necessary cost of maintaining operational security. Captain Richardson understood that she would face skepticism and resistance, and her response to those challenges was itself a test of her leadership capabilities under adverse conditions." She turned to address the senior NCOs directly. "Staff Sergeant Cole, Sergeant Brooks, Corporal Zhang, your skepticism was natural and understandable. Marine Corps culture emphasizes aggressive, assertive leadership styles because those approaches are effective in many combat situations. But Captain Richardson represents a different model of leadership, one that has proven successful in operations requiring coordination of diverse assets under complex conditions. The explanation provided context for everything the Marines had witnessed during Operation Rescue Dawn, but it also forced them to confront the extent to which they had misjudged Janet's capabilities based on superficial characteristics and cultural biases. Corporal Zhang raised her hand tentatively. "Ma'am, if Captain Richardson had this level of experience and qualifications, why wasn't this information available to help us understand her background?" General Hawthorne's response revealed the complexity of modern military operations and the challenges of maintaining operational security while building unit cohesion.
Corporal, Captain Richardson, this situation was anticipated and accepted as a necessary cost of maintaining operational security. Captain Richardson understood that she would face skepticism and resistance, and her response to those challenges was itself a test of her leadership capabilities under adverse conditions. She turned to address the senior NCOs directly. Staff Sergeant Cole, Sergeant Brooks, Corporal Zhang, your skepticism was natural and understandable. Marine Corps culture emphasizes aggressive, assertive leadership styles because those approaches are effective in many combat situations. But Captain Richardson represents a different model of leadership, one that has proven successful in operations requiring coordination of diverse assets under complex conditions. The explanation provided context for everything the Marines had witnessed during Operation Rescue Dawn, but it also forced them to confront the extent to which they had misjudged Janet's capabilities based on superficial characteristics and cultural biases. Corporal Zhang raised her hand tentatively. "Ma'am, if Captain Richardson had this level of experience and qualifications, why wasn't this information available to help us understand her background?" General Hawthorne's response revealed the complexity of modern military operations and the challenges of maintaining operational security while building unit cohesion. Corporal, Captain Richardson, this situation was anticipated and accepted as a necessary cost of maintaining operational security. Captain Richardson, this situation was anticipated and accepted as a necessary cost of maintaining operational security. Captain Richardson, this situation was anticipated and accepted as a necessary cost of maintaining operational security. Captain Richardson, this situation was anticipated and accepted as a necessary cost of maintaining operational security. Captain Richardson, this situation was anticipated and accepted as a necessary cost of maintaining operational security.
Each example revealed capabilities that dwarfed the challenges the Marines had assumed Janet was unprepared to handle. Her quiet, analytical approach wasn't inadequate for military leadership. It was specifically adapted for the most complex military operations imaginable. Brooks asked the question that everyone was thinking. "Ma'am, how do we reconcile this information with the leadership challenges we experienced during training exercises? If Captain Richardson had this level of capability, why did she seem to accommodate our resistance rather than asserting her authority?" General Hawthorne's answer revealed the sophisticated understanding of leadership and human psychology that had made Janet successful in her specialized assignments. Sergeant Brooks, Captain Richardson's approach was based on understanding that respect earned through demonstrated competence is more durable and effective than compliance demanded through assertion of authority. She knew that you would follow her when you had evidence of her capabilities, not because you were ordered to. The explanation provided context for Janet's patient approach to the resistance she had encountered, but it also revealed the extent to which she had been managing the situation with awareness and intention rather than uncertainty or weakness. The Marine Corps has invested considerable resources in developing Captain Richardson's unique capabilities, General Hawthorne concluded. Her assignment to command the 2nd Battalion wasn't punishment or an experiment. It was recognition that you represent one of our most capable units, worthy of leadership by one of our most accomplished officers. As the briefing concluded and the Marines filed out of the secure conference room, each of them carried with them a completely transformed understanding of the woman they had been serving under. The academic-seeming officer they had dismissed as unsuited for combat leadership was revealed to be one of the most experienced tactical coordinators in the Marine Corps. But the most profound revelation was still to come, as they would soon discover that their successful mission at FOB Razor was only the beginning of what Janet Richardson had planned for the 500 Marines of the 2nd Battalion. The dawn of the 3rd day after Operation Rescue Dawn brought with it an intelligence briefing that would test everything the Marines of the 2nd Battalion had learned about leadership, trust, and the true meaning of following someone into battle. The Secure Communications Center at Camp Lejeune buzzed with urgent activity as encrypted messages arrived from multiple intelligence agencies, painting a picture of an emerging threat that would require the most complex military response in recent Marine Corps history. Captain Janet Richardson stood before a wall of tactical displays showing real-time satellite imagery, intercepted communications, and threat assessments that revealed the full scope of what they were facing. The terrorist organization responsible for the FOB Razor attack had been identified as part of a network planning coordinated strikes against American military installations across 3 countries, with the primary target being a joint operations base housing over 2,000 American service members. The intelligence was both comprehensive and terrifying. The terrorist network had been planning their operations for over 18 months, acquiring advanced weapon systems, establishing strategic positions, and coordinating with hostile state actors to maximize the effectiveness of their attacks. The assault on FOB Razor had been a diversionary operation designed to draw attention and resources away from their primary objective. General Elizabeth Hawthorne's voice carried across the secure communication link from Marine Corps headquarters, her words heavy with the implications of what she was requesting. Captain Richardson, the intelligence community has identified a 72-hour window during which this terrorist network plans to execute their primary operation. We need a response that can prevent what could be the most devastating attack on American forces since the Beirut barracks bombing. Janet's response was delivered in the same quiet, measured tone that had once been mocked by her Marines, but was now recognized as the voice of exceptional competence under pressure. "General, the 22nd Battalion is ready for deployment. What are the tactical requirements?" The mission that General Hawthorne outlined was staggering in its complexity and scope. The terrorist network had established positions in mountainous terrain that provided natural defensive advantages while threatening multiple approach routes to the Joint Operations Base. Neutralizing the threat would require coordinated operations across a 200-square-mile area, involving air support, ground forces, special operations assets, and real-time intelligence coordination. "Captain, this operation will require deployment of all 500 Marines under your command, coordination with air assets from 3 different services, and tactical cooperation with special operations forces from multiple allied nations," General Hawthorne explained. "The complexity exceeds anything we've attempted in recent military history. Are you confident that your battalion can execute this level of operational coordination?" Janet's answer would become legendary in Marine Corps history, though she delivered it with the same quiet professionalism that had characterized every aspect of her leadership. "General, my Marines are ready. We'll execute the mission and neutralize the threat." The confidence in her voice was absolute, but what made the moment extraordinary was the reaction of the 500 Marines who heard her commitment over the battalion communication system. These were the same Marines who had questioned her qualifications just weeks earlier, who had resisted her authority and doubted her capabilities. Now, after witnessing her coordination of Operation Rescue Dawn and learning about her true background, they responded with unanimous approval. Staff Sergeant Marcus Cole's voice came through clearly on the communication system, representing not just his own squad, but speaking for Marines throughout the battalion. "Ma'am, Alpha Squad is ready for deployment. We'll follow your lead." The words carried weight that transcended military protocol. Cole wasn't just acknowledging orders, he was expressing trust earned through demonstrated competence and proven leadership under the most challenging conditions. Sergeant First Class David Brooks followed immediately. "Bravo Squad ready for deployment, Captain. We trust your tactical coordination." Corporal Lisa Zhang's response represented the transformation that had occurred throughout the battalion. "Charlie Squad ready, ma'am. We know you'll bring us home." One by one, every squad leader in the 2nd Battalion expressed their readiness to follow Janet into what they all understood would be the most dangerous operation of their military careers. The woman they had once dismissed as unsuited for combat leadership was now receiving expressions of confidence and trust that represented the highest honor Marines could bestow on their commanding officer. But the most remarkable moment was still to come. As Janet began coordinating the deployment that would take all 500 Marines into hostile territory against a sophisticated terrorist network, something unprecedented happened that would be remembered in Marine Corps history forever. The mission required insertion into terrain so dangerous and tactically challenging that success would depend entirely on the trust between the commanding officer and every Marine under her command. There would be no room for hesitation, no opportunity for second-guessing, and no margin for error in following orders. Janet's voice carried across the battalion communication system as she outlined the tactical requirements. Marines, this operation will test everything we've learned about coordination, trust, and following leadership into combat. The terrorist network we're facing has sophisticated equipment, defensive positions, and tactical awareness that makes this one of the most challenging operations in recent military history. She paused, understanding the weight of what she was asking. I need each of you to trust that the tactical coordination I provide will account for threats you can't see, opportunities you might not recognize, and timing that requires precision execution. Success depends on every Marine following orders immediately and completely, even when the tactical picture isn't clear from your individual position. The response from the battalion was immediate and overwhelming. Instead of the cautious acknowledgments that might have been expected for such a dangerous mission, the Marines responded with expressions of confidence that exceeded anything Janet had experienced in her specialized operations career. "Ma'am," Cole's voice carried across the communication system, "Alpha Squad trusts your tactical coordination completely. We'll execute any order you give us." Brooks followed with equal conviction. "Bravo Squad has complete confidence in your leadership, Captain. We'll follow you anywhere." Zhang's response represented the sentiment throughout the battalion. "Charlie Squad trusts your judgment, ma'am. We know you'll coordinate this operation better than anyone else could." But the moment that would define Janet's legacy came when the deployment began. As the 500 Marines of the 2nd Battalion prepared to board transport aircraft for what they all understood might be the most dangerous mission of their lives, something extraordinary happened that had never occurred in Marine Corps history. Without orders or coordination, every Marine in the battalion came to attention simultaneously. The movement was spontaneous and unanimous, representing not military protocol, but genuine respect for leadership that had been earned through demonstrated competence and proven care for Marine welfare. Then, in a gesture that violated every regulation in the Marine Corps manual but expressed the highest form of military respect, every Marine in the battalion rendered a salute to their commanding officer. It wasn't the formal salute required by military protocol, but the kind of spontaneous recognition that occurs when warriors acknowledge exceptional leadership. Janet returned the salute with the same quiet dignity that had characterized everything about her leadership, but her voice carried emotion that revealed how profoundly the gesture affected her. "The honor is mine, Marines. Let's bring everyone home." The aircraft lifted off, carrying 500 Marines toward their most challenging mission, but something fundamental had changed during the deployment preparation. The Marines who had once questioned Janet's qualifications were now following her with absolute trust and confidence. The mission that followed was a masterpiece of tactical coordination that would be studied in military academies for decades. Janet coordinated simultaneous operations across 200 square miles of hostile territory, managing air support from multiple services, directing ground forces through complex terrain, and adapting to real-time intelligence updates that required constant tactical modifications. Her quiet voice provided the central coordination for an operation involving over 1,000 personnel from different military services and allied nations. She managed complex timing requirements, coordinated fire support from naval, air, and ground assets, and maintained tactical awareness of a battlefield that spanned multiple countries. The terrorist network was neutralized completely within 48 hours, with zero friendly casualties and the successful capture of intelligence that prevented additional planned attacks throughout the region. The operation exceeded every expectation and established new standards for multi-unit coordination under combat conditions. But the most significant outcome wasn't tactical success, It was the transformation of 500 Marines who had learned that effective leadership transcended their preconceptions about command authority and military bearing. When the battalion returned to Camp Lejeune after the successful mission, they were met by Marine Corps leadership who had been following the operation through real-time reports. General Hawthorne was present for the homecoming, along with senior officers who understood they were witnessing something unprecedented in military history. The ceremony that followed was extraordinary in its simplicity and profound in its meaning. General Hawthorne stood before the assembled battalion and delivered recognition that would become part of Marine legend. Marines, General Hawthorne addressed the assembled unit. You have just completed what military historians will record as one of the most successful complex operations in Marine Corps history. But more importantly, you have demonstrated that the highest form of military effectiveness comes from trust, competence, and leadership that transcends traditional expectations. She turned to address Janet directly. Captain Richardson, your leadership of this battalion has redefined what effective command looks like. You have proven that quiet competence commands more respect than loud authority, that trust earned through demonstrated capability is more durable than compliance demanded through rank. The general's next words would be quoted in leadership courses for decades to come. You have shown that the most effective leaders are those who make everyone around them better at their job, who earn respect through competence rather than demand it through authority, and who understand that true military bearing comes from proven capability under pressure. But the moment that would be remembered forever came when General Hawthorne made an announcement that surprised everyone present. Captain Richardson, you are hereby promoted to the rank of Major, and the 2nd Battalion is being designated as the Marine Corps' new Rapid Response Unit with specialized training and equipment that reflects your unique capabilities. The promotion was extraordinary, but the designation of the entire battalion as a specialized unit was unprecedented. It represented recognition that Janet's leadership had transformed 500 individual Marines into something exceptional. As the ceremony concluded, Staff Sergeant Cole approached Janet with words that summarized the transformation that had occurred throughout the battalion. "Ma'am," he said, his voice carrying the respect of a warrior who had learned to recognize true leadership, "we were wrong about everything. Your quiet voice turned out to be the strongest command presence any of us had ever served under. We're honored to have followed you into battle." Janet's response was characteristic of everything the Marines had learned to admire about her leadership. "Staff Sergeant, the honor was mine. You proved that Marines can accomplish anything when they trust each other and work together." The aftermath of what became known as Operation Silent Thunder rippled through Marine Corps culture in ways that no one had anticipated. 6 months after the successful mission, training facilities across the country began implementing new leadership development programs based on Janet's methodologies. Her approach to tactical coordination became required study at the Marine Corps War College, and her communication techniques were integrated into officer training curricula. The transformation wasn't limited to academic study. Marines who had served under Janet's command found themselves sought after for assignments to other units. Their experience under her leadership considered invaluable preparation for complex operations. They carried with them not just tactical knowledge, but a completely different understanding of what effective leadership could look like. Staff Sergeant Cole, now promoted to Gunnery Sergeant, was assigned to the Marine Corps Recruit Training Command, where he began incorporating lessons from Janet's leadership style into the training of new Marine officers. His conversion from skeptic to advocate became a powerful teaching tool for addressing preconceptions about military leadership. "Leadership isn't about intimidation," Cole would tell classes of officer candidates. "It's about preparation, competence, and earning trust through demonstrated capability. The strongest leaders I've served under were those who made me better at my job, not those who made me fear making mistakes." Sergeant First Class Brooks, who had been promoted to First Sergeant, requested assignment to Marine Forces Special Operations Command. where his experience with complex coordination under Janet made him invaluable for planning multi-unit operations. His recommendations for tactical communication protocols were implemented throughout special operations training. Corporal Zhang, now a sergeant, was selected for advanced leadership training and assignment to the Marine Corps intelligence activity, where her experience with Janet's analytical approach to tactical challenges proved essential for developing new operational methodologies. The influence extended beyond individual careers. The 2nd Battalion's designation as the Rapid Response Unit led to the development of new training protocols that emphasized adaptive leadership, multi-unit coordination, and the kind of tactical flexibility that Janet had demonstrated. Other Marine units began requesting training exchanges to learn these methodologies. Major Janet Richardson herself was assigned to Marine Corps headquarters, where she began developing doctrine for what became known as adaptive command structures, leadership methodologies designed for the increasingly complex operational environments that modern military forces faced. Her work attracted attention from other military services and allied nations, leading to invitations to speak at international military conferences and participate in joint training exercises. The quiet voice that had once been mocked became recognized as representing a new paradigm in military leadership. But perhaps the most significant recognition came from an unexpected source. The families of the 47 Marines rescued during Operation Rescue Dawn organized a ceremony to thank the 2nd Battalion for their successful mission. The event, held at Camp Lejeune, brought together parents, spouses, and children whose loved ones had been saved through Janet's coordination of the rescue operation. Sarah Martinez, whose husband, Corporal Roberto Martinez, had been among the wounded Marines evacuated from FOB Razor, spoke for all the families present. Major Richardson, we want you to know that your leadership didn't just save Marines, it saved families. Our children still have their fathers. Our parents still have their sons because of your competence and dedication. The emotional weight of the recognition affected Janet profoundly, though she responded with characteristic humility. Mrs. Martinez, those Marines saved themselves through their courage and professionalism. I was honored to coordinate their safe return home. The ceremony included presentations from family members who shared stories about how the successful rescue had affected their lives. Children read letters thanking the Marines who had brought their parents home safely. Spouses expressed gratitude for leadership that had prioritized Marine welfare above all other considerations. The event reinforced for everyone present that military leadership was ultimately about human lives and family welfare, not abstract concepts of authority or command presence. Janet's quiet competence had translated directly into preserved families and continued lives. The recognition extended to academic circles as well. Princeton University, Janet's alma mater, invited her to deliver the commencement address for their graduating class. Her speech, titled Leading Through Service, became one of the most widely quoted addresses in recent academic history. True leadership, she told the graduating students, isn't about commanding attention, but about earning trust. It's not about being the loudest voice in the room, but about being the most prepared, the most competent, and the most dedicated to the success of those you serve with. The speech was attended by military leadership, academic officials, and business executives who recognized that the leadership principles Janet articulated transcended military applications. Corporations began implementing training programs based on her methodologies, and business schools started studying her approach to managing complex organizations under pressure. International recognition followed when Janet was invited to address a NATO conference on modern military leadership. Her presentation on adaptive command in complex operations became the foundation for new alliance-wide training protocols. Representatives from allied militaries requested training exchanges to learn the methodologies that had made the 2nd Battalion's operations so successful. The quiet leadership style that had once seemed unsuited for military command was now being studied and implemented by military forces around the world.
The most profound recognition, however, came from within the Marine Corps itself. During the annual Marine Corps birthday celebration, the Commandant of the Marine Corps presented Janet with the Distinguished Service Medal, citing her revolutionary contributions to military leadership doctrine and exceptional performance in complex combat operations. The ceremony was attended by Marines from across the Corps, including many who had initially been skeptical of non-traditional leadership approaches. The recognition represented institutional acknowledgement that effective leadership could take forms that challenged traditional expectations. In his presentation speech, the Commandant addressed the broader implications of Janet's success. Major Richardson has demonstrated that the Marine Corps must continue evolving our understanding of leadership to meet the challenges of modern warfare. Her success proves that competence, preparation, and dedication to Marine welfare are more important than conformity to traditional leadership stereotypes. The years that followed saw Janet's influence continue to expand throughout military culture. Officers who had trained under her methodologies were promoted to senior positions, where they implemented her approaches to leadership development. The quiet revolution she had initiated through her competence and character became an institutional change that affected how the Marine Corps developed and promoted leaders. Training manuals were rewritten to include case studies from her operations. Leadership courses incorporated her methodologies for building trust and maintaining unit cohesion under pressure. The Marine Corps began actively recruiting officers whose capabilities matched the adaptive leadership model she had demonstrated. But the most enduring legacy was the transformation of the Marines who had served under her command. Years later, when they had moved on to other assignments and advanced in their own careers, they continued to speak about Major Janet Richardson as the most effective leader they had ever served under. Their stories became part of Marine Corps folklore, passed down to new generations of Marines, who learned that true strength and leadership came not from volume or aggression, but from competence, preparation, and unwavering dedication to the welfare of those you lead. The woman whose voice had been deemed too soft for command had proven that the strongest leadership often speaks quietly, that true authority comes from earned respect, and that the most effective commanders are those who make everyone around them better at their job. Her legacy continued to influence military leadership development long after she had moved on to other assignments, proving that exceptional leadership creates ripple effects that extend far beyond individual careers or single operations. The quiet voice that had once been mocked became the standard for a new generation of military leaders who understood that true strength comes from competence, character, and the courage to lead differently when leadership demands it.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.